Protestant apologist Greg Koukl writes in his book, Precious Unborn Human Persons, if the unborn is not a human person, no justification for abortion is necessary. However, if the unborn is a human person, no justification for abortion is adequate. Koukl uses a story to illustrate the point that we can't answer the question, can I kill this, unless we know the answer to the prior question, what is this? I usually paraphrase Koukl's story in this way. Imagine you're at the kitchen sink washing the dishes. Your 5-year-old runs up behind you and says, Mommy, or Daddy, can I kill this? What's the first question you will ask? Probably, what is it? After all, if it's a cockroach, then it's time to get out a can of Raid. If it's a cat, some people who resent cats may waver on the answer, but most of us would say the answer is no. But what if it's his 2-year-old sister? Along with saying no, you'd better call a counselor. We give different answers for each situation because the answer to the question, can I kill this, depends almost entirely on the identity of the thing being killed. Every honest person involved in the abortion debate admits something is killed during an abortion. If it is mere tissue, then abortion is no more immoral than clipping a toenail. But if a human being with the right to life is killed, then abortion is immoral. If we fail to answer the question, what are the unborn, we will argue pointlessly about subjects that have nothing to do with whether abortion is right or wrong. In fact, you'll notice that the following pro-life arguments are less effective because they ignore the question we always try to steer the conversation back to. What are the unborn? The first two focus on alternatives to abortion instead of the wrongness of abortion itself. For example, consider the claim, what about adoption? Even if a woman lived in a country where adoption was not available or was illegal, this would not make it right to abort the child. Since we don't support killing orphans, no one wants to adopt. Moreover, some pro-life advocates suggest this alternative far too casually. One might give up a beloved sweater at a garage sale, but women don't give up their babies to anyone. It's more appropriate to say a woman places a child for adoption. Unfortunately, many women describe the experience of placing a child for adoption as a kind of death. Pregnancy resource centers routinely report that women fear adoption more than either abortion or raising their child themselves. Adoption is a good thing, but we should describe the choice to place a child for adoption as a heroic one, and women will only consider this choice if they already believe that abortion is not a viable option because it involves killing a helpless child. The same is true when it comes to suggesting a woman raise her child instead of choosing abortion. Once again, a woman, as well as the man who is often involved in this decision, won't make the difficult choice to raise a child unless they are more repulsed by the choice to abort their child. Another less effective argument against abortion is relying solely on the claim that abortion hurts women. Now, I've seen the devastating effects abortion has on women, as well as men who were involved in choosing abortion for their spouses. As an observer at post-abortive retreats, I have listened to women describe how abortions they had 50 years ago still cause them anguish and heartbreak. While I agree abortion can have serious consequences for the woman who has one, I don't see how that fact justifies outlawing abortion. Alcohol and tobacco cause well-known health problems for millions of people, but those things are still legal. Advocates of the woman-centered approach may respond that abortion-minded women can at least be deterred from choosing abortion by being shown evidence of abortion's negative health effects. But proving abortion is, on the whole, worse for women than giving birth can be difficult and involves making sense of large amounts of complex medical research. The woman-centered pro-life strategy is like arguing that killing civilians in war is wrong because it results in post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers. That's a relevant fact, as well as indirect evidence that innocent human beings are being killed. But it's not why killing civilians is wrong. The intentional killing of innocent civilians is an intrinsically evil act, and the negative side effects, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, flow from the act's evil nature. This doesn't mean I think the woman-centered approach has no place in the pro-life movement. I encourage women, as well as men involved in these decisions, to share their testimonies once they feel comfortable speaking publicly about their abortions. These gripping stories add a personal element to the discussion that makes the arguments for the pro-life position more persuasive. Pope St. John Paul II even said of post-abortive women, "With the friendly and expert help and advice of other people, and as a result of your own painful experience, you can be among the most eloquent defenders of everyone's right to life." The woman-centered approach may not provide the complete case for why abortion should be outlawed, but it does provide a great opportunity to start a conversation about why women regret their abortions, namely, that they regret being accomplices to the death of their own children. If that is the reason women regret their abortions, then the case for outlawing the procedure becomes much stronger. Rather than make less effective arguments against abortion, pro-lifers must stay focused on the one question that matters most. What are the unborn? As Greg Koukল's dishwashing story shows, if the unborn are not human beings, then getting an abortion is a little more serious than going to the dentist to have a tooth pulled. Since we would not outlaw tooth extractions in order to reduce the number of them that occur, we should not outlaw abortion simply to reduce the number of abortions that occur. If, that is, the unborn are not human beings. But if the unborn are human beings, then abortion can't be justified, any more than killing a 2-year-old could be justified. If we wouldn't kill 2-year-olds because they were unwanted, and if the unborn are as human as a 2-year-old, then it follows that we should not kill unborn children, even if they are unwanted. Unfortunately, if you make this point in such a blunt way, opponents may feel lectured or judged and ignore what you have to say. A more effective approach involves asking a series of questions that helps the person with whom you're speaking come to this conclusion on his own. In the next few lessons, we will see how to use that approach, called trot out a toddler, to move the conversation away from irrelevant issues and back to the one question that matters most: what are the unborn? When most people are asked why abortion should be legal, their first answer isn't because a fetus is not a human being. Instead, most pro-choice advocates bypass this issue and simply say abortion should be legal because women need abortion for some important reason. If you make abortion illegal, then what about women who are too poor to take care of a child? What about the children who will be abused? What about the right to choose? What about overpopulation? What about rape? It's tempting to divert your attention away from the question, what are the unborn, and answer other questions like, is the world really overpopulated? Or, are some women in America really too poor to raise a child? But you don't want to do that. Instead, remember to focus on one question. What are the unborn? At Justice for All, the pro-life advocacy organization I previously worked for, we called reasons for legal abortion that don't answer the question, what are the unborn, off-topic reasons. Whereas reasons for abortion that did answer the question, what are the unborn, we called them on-topic reasons. Our goal in a conversation was to always move from off-topic reasons to on-topic reasons. Here, let's try an exercise to help us distinguish between these reasons. I'll offer a reason for legal abortion. You tell me if it's on-topic or off-topic. A woman has a right to choose. It's off-topic. It doesn't answer the question, what are the unborn? A fetus isn't viable. On-topic. It does answer the question. A fetus isn't human. On-topic. It's false, but don't confuse on-topic with true or correct. On-topic just means that the reason answers the question, what are the unborn? The world is overpopulated. Off-topic. In order to get from off-topic to on-topic reasons, we use a tool developed by Protestant pro-life activist Scott Klusendorf called Trot Out a Toddler. My favorite articulation of Trot Out a Toddler was created by my former JFA colleague, Steve Wagner, which he calls the 4 A's. They are agree, apply, ask why, and ah. Here's how they work. Step 1, agree. Whenever possible, agree with the sentiments behind the reason being given to keep abortion legal. Some pro-life advocates think that agreeing to anything is a sign of weakness, but pro-choice advocates see it as a sign of compassion and understanding. For example, when poverty is mentioned, you can agree that caring for an impoverished child is difficult. When the right to choose is invoked, you can agree that women should be able to choose all sorts of things. Invoking many areas of agreement at the beginning of the conversation eases tension and makes it easier to discuss areas of disagreement. But your agreement should not be merely used as a strategy to win the argument. Instead, we should genuinely show concern for the lives of both born and unborn people who were affected by an unintended pregnancy. Step 2. Apply. Next, take the reason being given to justify abortion and use it to justify killing a 2-year-old. This takes practice, and I recommend that when you describe the trot out a toddler example, extend your hand about 2 or 3 feet off the ground, as if you were touching the top of a 2-year-old's head. If you get stuck, remember that the apply always starts the same way. Extend your hand and say, "Imagine I have a 2-year-old here, and his mother." This works for almost any reason that does not answer the question, what are the unborn? For example, if someone says poor women need abortion, you might say, "Imagine I have a 2-year-old here, and his mother is poor and feels like she cannot care for him. Should she be allowed to kill him?" This may seem like an absurd question, but that is precisely the point. If unborn children are as human as toddlers, then it should be just as absurd to ask the question, "Imagine I have a poor pregnant woman who feels like she cannot care for another child. Should she be allowed to have an abortion?" The only difference is the age of the child who is being killed. After using the pro-choice advocate's initial reason for abortion as a justification for killing a 2-year-old, it's important to resist the temptation to say, obviously it's wrong for a woman to kill her 2-year-old. Therefore, abortion is wrong, because the unborn is as human as a 2-year-old. We want them to come to that realization for themselves. That's why, no matter how absurd it sounds, ask the person only if the reason women need legal abortion would also, whether it's poverty, choice, women's rights, would also be a good reason to kill a 2-year-old. Then be quiet. Just let the question hang in the air until the pro-choice advocate responds. Step 3. Ask why. When they say it is wrong to kill the 2-year-old, ask, why is it wrong? You can even preface this question by saying, I know this is a weird question, but humor me. Why is it wrong for the woman to kill her 2-year-old? Sometimes the pro-choice advocate will answer, because it's illegal. You can then ask if killing 2-year-olds should be illegal. If he says yes, ask, why do you think killing 2-year-olds should be illegal? If they say it's because you can always place a 2-year-old for adoption, ask if 2-year-olds that aren't being adopted, like those languishing in the foster care system, can be killed. Most people agree that killing a 2-year-old is wrong because 2-year-olds are innocent human beings, and it is wrong to kill innocent human beings. The pro-choice advocate may even anticipate where your questions are leading and say it is wrong to kill a 2-year-old because he is a person, or a born human, or he is breathing, or he is in some way different than an unborn child who we are allowed to kill. This is exactly where you want the conversation to go. Step 4. That's the issue. The last part of Trot Out a Toddler narrates the epiphany the pro-choice person should be having in relation to the pro-life position. In this step, the pro-life person responds to the answer to step 3 and says, so that's the issue. The issue is not about poverty, or choice, or age, or health, or whatever original reason was offered as to why abortion must remain legal. Because you wouldn't justify killing a 2-year-old for that reason. If the unborn are just as human as a 2-year-old, then we shouldn't kill them for that reason either. You and I just disagree over whether unborn children should have the same rights born children possess. Remember that Trot Out a Toddler does not constitute the entire pro-life position. Its goal is to just get us talking about the one question that matters most in the abortion debate. What are the unborn? It's common to hear people say abortion should be legal because nobody knows when life begins. But even if we were unsure about when life began, that wouldn't justify abortion. Just as we would not shoot a figure in the woods that might be a fellow hiker and not a bear, then we should not risk killing a person whose existence in the womb is at least probable. But why should we believe that no one is truly able to know when life begins? The unwillingness to define when human life begins can be found in Roe v. Wade, where Justice Harry Blackmun wrote, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to speculate as to the answer." Why is there disagreement? The problem is that the question of when human life begins is actually two distinct questions. It can be a scientific question about the beginning of a human organism, or it can be a philosophical question about when a human organism has intrinsic value, a right to life, or becomes a person. Pro-life advocates generally see life as a simple concept and answer the question of when life begins scientifically. For them, a human being is either alive or dead, and each human being's life began at conception. Case closed. Pro-choice advocates, however, generally see life as a complex concept and answer the question of when life begins philosophically. For them, a two-celled embryo is merely insignificant life with the potential to become a human later in pregnancy. The failure to acknowledge these two different kinds of questions about the beginning of life can result in people talking past each other instead of talking to each other. That's why in this lesson we will go over the best way to prove the unborn are biological human beings, or human beings in the scientific sense of the word human. This is important because you can't have human rights, like the right to life, unless you are a biological human being. How can pro-life advocates prove the unborn are biological human beings? It may be tempting to use in utero images or ultrasounds of children as our sole evidence of their humanity. While this tactic is useful in some cases, it has the potential to reinforce the idea that our human value comes from what we look like instead of what we are. It's not a good way to demonstrate the humanity of a 4-week-old child who doesn't look like most born human beings. Pro-life advocates should also avoid simply making claims such as abortion kills a life, or even life begins at conception. This leaves them open to a rebuttal such as this one from atheist Carl Sagan. Despite many claims to the contrary, life does not begin at conception. It is an unbroken chain that stretches back nearly to the origin of the Earth 4.6 billion years ago. Nor does human life begin at conception. It is an unbroken chain dating back to the origin of our species hundreds of thousands of years ago. Now, I think in most contexts, people know what you mean when you say life begins at conception, and it's not what Sagan has conjured up. But if people raise an objection like this, you can say that while it is true living cells or human cells in general have a long history, the same is not true for individual human beings. Sagan's criticism is overcome if we say, instead, a human organism begins to exist at conception, or the life of an individual human being begins at conception. This may seem like semantics, but it is important to use this vocabulary with pro-choice advocates, who may think an embryo is alive in the same sense that sperm and egg are alive. This mistaken set of assumptions may cause the pro-choice advocate to think that an embryo's life never really began at conception. He might instead think that at conception, life in the form of sperm and egg was rearranged and became life in the form of an embryo that has the same value as egg or sperm until the embryo becomes a human being later in pregnancy. When it comes to defending the claim that an individual human being begins to exist at conception, I don't recommend appeals to authority such as science says life begins at conception, or all scientists agree life begins at conception. The person you're speaking with may simply not believe you, or he may think the authorities you are citing are wrong. Instead, I recommend using an argument that shows that from conception onwards, the unborn are living, complete human beings. My favorite argument for the humanity of the unborn is based on Steve Wagner's 10-second pro-life apologist. Steve was once flustered that he could not defend his pro-life beliefs in a conversation that took him by surprise. So he went home and crafted a 10-second soundbite that goes like this. If it's growing, isn't it alive? If it has human parents, isn't it human? And human beings like you and me are valuable, aren't we? Sometimes Steve's soundbite will do the trick, and the person with whom you are talking will accept that the unborn are biological human beings. Other times, you may have to use more evidence to prove that the unborn are 1. Alive, 2. Human, and 3. Whole organisms. In the next lesson, we will examine each one of these points in the argument. Scientists generally agree that if something is growing by cellular reproduction and converting food into energy, or metabolism, it is alive. The unborn are alive because they're receiving nutrients from their mother that cause them to grow via cellular reproduction. I've heard some people argue that the unborn are not alive because they can't survive outside of their mother's body. The problem with this objection is that it proves only that the unborn are alive in a certain place, not that they aren't alive at all. Another way to show that the unborn are alive is to ask the question, what does abortion do to the fetus? Most people will say that abortion kills the fetus, while some stubborn pro-choicers will say abortion removes the fetus from the womb. You can ask these people what happens to the fetus after it is removed. The critic must admit that the end result of these actions is the death of the fetus. But in order for something to die, it has to have been alive at some point. Of course, so what if the fetus is alive? Bacteria and oak trees are alive, and we kill them all the time. To answer this objection, we must show that the unborn are not just alive, but they are also human. When it comes to demonstrating that the unborn are biologically human, or members of our species, there are two kinds of evidence the pro-life advocate can use. First, we can ask what kind of animal the parents of the fetus in question are. If the parents are dogs, then the fetus will be a dog. If the parents are cats, then the fetus will be a cat. If the parents are human, then the fetus will be human. The other way to show the unborn are biologically human is to examine their genetic code, or DNA. If the fetus possesses a human genetic code, then he is a human being. Some critics will make this bizarre objection, though. It's not human, it's a fetus. If this happens, ask the person, what is a fetus? Or what is an embryo? The terms embryo and fetus describe an organism's stages of development in the same way the terms infant, toddler, and adolescent describe stages of development. It would be nonsensical to define these terms without referencing the organism they describe, which brings us to our third point. Some critics will say, the fetus is alive and human, but every cell in my body is alive and human. Is every cell in my body a human being? Are sperm and eggs human beings too? Sperm, egg, fetuses, and toddlers are all human in the adjective sense of the word, since they possess human DNA. Unlike sperm and egg, however, fetuses and toddlers are also human in the noun sense of the word. Specifically, they are human organisms or individual members of the human species. What do we mean when we say the unborn is an organism? An organism is a collection of biological parts, or organs, that function together to sustain the existence of a whole being that possesses the qualities of life. Some people will say that the unborn are clumps of cells and not organisms, but this objection reveals a mistaken understanding of biology. We describe loose collections of things as clumps when the parts do not interact for the good of the whole. For example, a fistful of sand would be a clump, but a functioning watch is not a clump of gears, unless you smash it with a hammer. I use the following test to show something is an organism and not a clump of cells. If I can give this living thing time, nutrition, and a proper environment, and it is able to develop toward becoming a mature member of its species, then it is an organism and not a mere body part. Because body cells such as skin, sperm, and egg can never, even given time, nutrition, and a proper environment, or any environment, develop into an adult human, they fail the organism test. When removed from the human body, they are clumps of cells or tissue that will quickly die. In contrast, you and I are organisms, because if we are given time, food, and the proper environment, like not on the moon, not at the bottom of the ocean, we will continue to develop into mature members of the human species. Likewise, an unborn child, when given time, nutrition, and a proper environment, i.e. not outside the uterus, will develop into a mature human being if he does not die prematurely. Embryologist E.L. Potter points out, every time a sperm cell and ovum unite, a new being is created which is alive and will continue to live unless its death is brought about by some specific condition. The fact that some embryos and even other born children die before they become adult humans does not negate the fact that they are human beings. They still are human beings because they have the intrinsic capacity to develop into a mature human being, even if their development is tragically cut short. Once you've presented the 10-second pro-life apologist, you can supplement it with arguments from competent authorities. First, there are doctors and scientists who agree that unborn children are biological human beings. The standard medical text, Human Embryology and Teratology, states, although human life is a continuous process, fertilization is a critical landmark, because under ordinary circumstances, a new, genetically distinct human organism is formed. And by the way, among embryologists, the preferred term for the beginning of life is fertilization. Keith Moore in TVN Persaud's textbook, The Developing Human, states, human life begins at fertilization. And Langman's Medical Embryology also states, development begins with fertilization. Second, pro-choice philosophers agree unborn children are biological human beings. David Boonen, author of A Defense of Abortion, writes, perhaps the most straightforward relation between you and me on the one hand and every human fetus on the other is this. All are living members of the same species, Homo sapiens. A human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage in his or her development. Peter Singer holds the same view. It is possible to give human being a precise meaning. We can use it as equivalent to member of the species Homo sapiens. Whether a being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically by an examination of the nature of the chromosomes in the cells of living organisms. In this sense, there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo, conceived from human sperm and eggs, is a human being. So far, we've seen how science shows us that the unborn are biological human beings. But many pro-choice advocates are willing to admit this point. What they won't admit, however, is that the unborn are persons, or beings that have the same right to life that you and I possess. Before we defend the personhood of the unborn, however, it will be helpful if we further explore the concept of personhood. Some pro-lifers say person is a term that confuses the issue. We should just stick to the argument that it is wrong to kill innocent human beings, and since the unborn are innocent human beings, it follows that it is wrong to kill them. But abortion defenders can undermine this approach by appealing to common intuitions we have about persons that are separate from our intuitions about human beings. For example, in her 1973 article on the moral and legal status of abortion, pro-choice philosopher Marianne Warren asks us to consider this example. Imagine a space traveler who lands on an unknown planet and encounters a race of beings utterly unlike any he has ever seen or heard of. If he wants to be sure of behaving morally towards these beings, he has to somehow decide whether they are people and hence have full moral rights, or whether they are the sort of thing which he need not feel guilty about treating as, for example, a source of food. How should he go about making this decision? Warren goes on to say our space traveler would probably look for at least one of the following 5 criteria: consciousness, reasoning, self-motivated activity, communication about an indefinite number of topics, and self-awareness. I agree with Warren that if Superman or Yoda really existed, then they would be persons, and we'd know that because they exhibit these criteria. This shows that the terms person and human being are not synonymous, but that human beings are a kind of person. Of course, Superman and Yoda are just fictional characters, and rational aliens may or may not exist in the cosmos. But Christians agree that non-human persons exist. They're called angels. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states, the existence of the spiritual, non-corporeal beings that sacred scripture usually calls angels is a truth of faith. The witness of scripture is as clear as the unanimity of tradition. Angels are intellects, or what we might call persons, that do not have physical bodies. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit would be another example of non-human persons, though the word person is being used analogously. Regardless, most pro-lifers would have to agree with Warren that person is a class to which human beings belong, which then opens the door for her and other pro-choice advocates to argue that maybe only some humans belong to that class. She concludes, all we need to claim to demonstrate that a fetus is not a person is that any being which satisfies none of the previous criteria is certainly not a person. Warren's argument fails, however, because it would exclude many born people from being persons. In fact, nearly 10 years after its initial publication, Warren added a postscript to her article saying, one of the most troubling objections to the argument presented in this article is that it may appear to justify not only abortion, but infanticide as well. There are many reasons why infanticide is much more difficult to justify than abortion, even though, if my argument is correct, neither constitutes the killing of a person. Since all human beings differ in size, intelligence, and physical ability, we must ground human equality in the one thing that is truly equal about all of us, our human nature. Otherwise, if a person's right to life were based on a property that comes in degrees, such as his level of intelligence, then the right to life itself would come in degrees. For example, smarter people would have more of a right to life than the less smart. Even pro-choice philosophers who are sympathetic to this view, like Jeff McMahon, recognize it, quote, rests on distressingly insecure foundations, and seems to conflict with society's cherished belief that all human beings should have equal rights. Don't the arguments against the personhood of unborn children sound familiar? Every time in history a group of human beings has been disqualified from being considered people, African Americans, women, Jews, the mentally handicapped, the reason for the disqualification turned out to be bogus. Of course, the experiences of these groups differ dramatically from the experiences of aborted unborn children, who are usually not self-aware when they are aborted. So it isn't wise to say that abortion is just like slavery or the Holocaust. However, it should be noted that the process of stripping the unborn of their personhood because of morally irrelevant biological traits does parallel previous oppression of born people. That's why it makes more sense to associate our right to life, a property you either have or don't have, with something a human being either does or doesn't have. In this case, being a member of a rational kind, like the human species. The 6th century philosopher Boethius said that a person was an individual substance with a rational nature. What this means is that a particular being is a person or has basic rights if it is a member of a rational kind. But this definition of personhood is not human-centric, because even intelligent aliens or other rational beings such as angels would be persons under such a view. Even if we can't function rationally, such as when we were infants, we were still members of a valuable kind that deserves respect and protection under the law. Since we remain members of the humankind throughout our entire existence, it follows that through every stage of our existence, we deserve the respect and protection humans normally receive. In the next lesson, we'll learn a handy acronym that will help us to articulate this important truth. The philosopher Stephen Schwartz has argued that there are only 4 differences between born and unborn humans, and none of the differences justifies depriving unborn humans of the right to life. Schwartz uses the acronym SLED to summarize these differences: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Just as we would ask a racist why skin color makes someone less valuable, we should ask pro-choice advocates why SLED differences make someone less valuable, or not a someone at all. We must make pro-choice advocates defend their view of personhood and show why it is superior to the pro-life view based on universal human equality. The SLED critique follows the same basic pattern. Number 1, affirm the difference illustrated in the SLED acronym exists. Number 2, ask the critic what a person is, or why this difference is what makes someone a person. Number 3, show that this difference has nothing to do with being a person, because some born people also differ in one or more of these ways. Size. Theologian Daniel McGuire ridicules an embryo's size to discount its humanity. He says, "I have held babies in my hands, and now I held this embryo. I know the difference." Of course, there is a difference in size between newborns and embryos, but the key issue is this: does that difference matter? I clearly know the difference between an adult woman who I can talk to and a premature infant who is smaller than a football and can't even recognize me. But neither the premature infant nor the human embryo can be rightfully disqualified from being considered a person simply because it is smaller than I. Size is irrelevant to the issue of human value. Level of development. Arguments that disqualify unborn children based on their level of development always have at least one of these 3 flaws. Number 1, they set the level of development too high so that infants are not persons. This happens when the pro-choice advocate says a person is anyone who can think rationally, and fetuses can't do that. Sure, but newborn infants cannot have rational thoughts either. But we don't say they have the sentience of a cow, even though infants have about the same level of brain development as a cow. In response, some people may say that a newborn infant is at least aware of the outside, and that makes him a person. But that leads to the second flaw. Number 2, they set the level of development too low so that non-human animals are persons. If being able to feel pain makes someone a person, then many non-human animals, including ones we don't feel bad about killing when they are a nuisance like rats, would be persons, and killing them would be murder. Since they obviously aren't persons, it follows that feeling pain is irrelevant to what makes something a person. This should be pointed out if they resort to the third flaw. Number 3, they make the level of development arbitrary in order to exclude the unborn. If the pro-choice advocate says a person is any human being that can feel pain, then ask them why feeling pain matters when they don't think non-human animals that feel pain are persons. This is just an arbitrary attempt to define unborn children out of their personhood. Arbitrarily saying a person can only be a thing that is human plus living outside the womb is as prejudiced as saying a person is a thing that is human plus white or human plus male. Why not just say all humans are persons? Pro-life advocates should remember that when critiquing the pro-choice advocate's definition of a person, it's important to use non-controversial examples. For example, if the critic says that a person is anyone who can feel pain or think like he can, it's not wise to ask in response, but what about comatose human beings who will never think or feel again? Are they not persons? The pro-choicer might reply, no, the irreversibly comatose are not persons. That's why in nearly all my examples, I use newborn infants, because they are close in age and level of development to fetuses, and almost everyone agrees it is wrong to kill newborn infants. If we can show human embryos and fetuses do not differ in any relevant way from human infants, then we can redirect people's natural moral outrage against infanticide toward abortion. Environment. Pro-choice advocates sometimes say the unborn aren't in the world yet, or they aren't born, and so it's not wrong to abort them. But why does a person have to be alive in a certain environment? Now, I'm not saying women are merely environments, locations, or vessels that carry an unborn child. Instead, I am saying that a woman's body represents intimate space that is shared with another human being. If moving from one place to another outside of the womb does not negate our personhood, then how can moving from inside the womb to outside it cause someone to become a person? Peter Singer summarizes the absurdity of placing value on the location of an organism. Pro-life groups are right about one thing. The location of the baby inside or outside the womb cannot make such a crucial moral difference. We cannot coherently hold that it is all right to kill a fetus a week before birth, but as soon as the baby is born, everything must be done to keep it alive. This shows that environment is irrelevant to the issue of human value. And finally, the D in SLED, degree of dependency. A pro-choice advocate could respond to the last argument and say that at birth, what changes isn't the unborn child's location, but the fact that he no longer needs the woman's body in order to survive. This is not entirely accurate, because a fetus can survive outside of a woman's body at an age several months before the traditional time of birth. The earliest a newborn can survive outside the womb is called viability, and it is usually dated in the United States at around 24 weeks after conception. But newborns cannot live on their own outside of the womb. They would be dead in a few hours or days if left on a hospital table. If the pro-choicer says that a person is someone who can survive outside the womb even with assistance, then he is blindly asserting that the unborn are not persons. Why not say that a person is anyone who can survive outside of either a womb or an incubator? The entire idea that the unborn are not persons because they are dependent is opposite to our cultural intuition. Crimes against adults are wrong, but nearly everyone thinks those same crimes, such as rape or abuse, are even worse when committed against infants. This intuition comes from the fact that infants are utterly dependent and cannot protect themselves. If we consider it worse to harm an infant because he is so helpless, then wouldn't it be worse to kill a human being who is even more helpless than an infant, such as a fetus or an embryo? This shows that degree of dependency is irrelevant to what makes human beings persons.